Rock Solid Families wants to thank Maxwell Construction for sponsoring the Rock Solid Families podcast. For over 30 years, Maxwell Construction has been a leader in turning dreams into realities, building schools, banks, restaurants, and many other commercial and public facilities. Maxwell Construction has made it their priority to not just build buildings, but to build into their community. So if you have any construction needs, call them at 812-537-2200. Welcome to Rock Solid Families Podcast. This is going to be good today, guys. This
Who are you? What are you talking about?
I can't. I'm not telling you who I am. Why would I tell you who I am?
That's a defense mechanism.
What am I? Quit calling me out, Linda. Guys, welcome to Rock Solid Families Podcast. We have Meredith on set with us today.
Hello.
And you know what's cool about bringing a new person on is we get to really practice new and different things. Everybody kind of has an interest or an expertise or a latest training. And today, Meredith is going to take us through the ropes. Mm-hmm. And so today we are going to talk about defense mechanisms. Like, I didn't do it. It wasn't me.
It's your fault.
Yeah,
it's your fault.
That's right.
And, if you don't think that you have defense mechanisms, right away you have a defense mechanism.
That's a defense mechanism.
Yep.
That's
Denial.
one of your defense mechanisms. It's kind of like saying, "Oh, I'm such a humble guy." The idea that you could say you're a humble guy means you're not a humble guy. Okay, and so we're gonna have some fun today in our conversation, but we're really gonna get to a very serious topic because sometimes these defense mechanisms create a boundary from us actually getting a little deeper either into ourself or into a relationship to get an honest, deeper whatever I'm trying to say within that relationship. So anyway.
Intimacy,
yes, or just connection. Connection is what I was looking for there. So.
Before we do, let's thank our sponsors. We want to thank Casey's Outdoor Solutions and Maxwell Construction for their support of the Rock Solid Families podcast, as well as Rock Solid Families. And if you don't know who we are, please check us out at rocksolidfamilies.org. We are a faith-based nonprofit located in the greater Cincinnati area, and we do faith-based coaching. And part of our work is dealing with people with defense mechanisms, right?
Yeah.
Meredith, you have been on board now for how long? Gosh, like 5 weeks, 6 weeks?
2 months.
2 months?
Yeah.
2 months. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, as I talked about before, like everybody kind of has a different training and experience and then even kind of a niche. And you, in your work, really dug into just observing and studying people's defense mechanisms. So tell us a little bit about defense mechanisms. Like in general, what is a defense mechanism?
Yeah, so
That's a loaded question.
a fancy way, it's an unconscious resource to decrease internal stress.
Okay, so I'm feeling a pressure cooker cooking up, and I've got to have a release valve to kind of get me out of the pressure.
Right. And it's unconscious, right? Like that's where if you feel like you're not or you do not have defense mechanisms, like it's happening and you don't even realize it.
Sure. Okay.
In a simpler way, it's just a way to protect ourselves from uncomfortable feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it ties back into within each of us, we are hardwired for fight or flight mechanisms. That was fight, flight, and freeze. Like these are these three things that people naturally go to. How our nervous system just says, hey, in order to survive, you're going to be wired to do these things, right?
Right. Yeah. The limbic system, like that part of our brain that's responsible for our behaviors and emotional responses. We have that survival instinct.
Yeah.
Again, we're that unconscious
Which in a good way helps us to protect ourselves, like in a fire or like if you had a car crash, like you just reactively or see a bear, you run. And so there's these instincts in us that are designed to protect us, but they can also be used to kind of hide.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and I think like what we notice in our work, especially if when we're working with someone that has been through a lot of stressful, traumatic situations, or like if, especially in childhood, growing up, just always having to react, right, for survival. That's just hardwiring the brain to react. Yeah. So it can even get to a point where the brain senses a threat, and there's not, in reality, there isn't a threat there, but the brain it's been through it so much, and it's had to protect so much that now it's to a point where, like, you could give me a weird look. And
I would not do that.
But, my brain could be like, he
triggers you.
Yeah.
So you're saying, and that kind of leads to my question, how are defense mechanisms formed? What I'm hearing you say is a lot of times it's from childhood trauma or experiences that scared them and they felt like they needed to protect themselves.
Yeah, I think, another way to put that is like an emotional wound. Because I think, again, we can get scared or intimidated by the word trauma. But really any situation where we've been hurt. And I think, again, when we say, oh, I might not have, you might feel like, oh, I don't have trauma, but
right.
We're humans. We live in a fallen world, and we've all been hurt, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Well, I want to hover around here for just a second, because and you mentioned something before, kind of like, we all have these alarm or these warning mechanisms, and they're primal, meaning they're primitive. Yeah. And just because you have them doesn't mean they are right. So, for instance, if somebody yells fire, your primal instinct might be to run, but that may not be the right thing to do.
Response.
You might be trampling over people. You might be not helping somebody. You might be going out the wrong door because you're not aware. And so, just because it's a primal instinct doesn't mean it's the right thing. But the problem we have is, whatever we practice and get just a little level of success out of, we get this now as our go-to. And so, like, growing up, I was more of an avoider as a kid, but I have brothers, one in particular, who was a fighter. And so the same stimulus, I would just go, no, I'm not messing with it. And his reaction was to go right into the fight. Okay. And so that part is very genetically into you. And then once you practice it, like I practice avoidance, and I had a level of success with it in my mind. But, I'm not even going to deal with this. And so I'd walk away. He practiced doubling down and getting into fights, and he had a level of success with it. But it doesn't mean it's right. Like we've talked on my show, on for my sake, avoidance has bit me in the butt, but also dropping your fist on people is also, hurtful. Yeah. So it is primal. But we practice whatever we think gave us a little bit of success. And that's where we're talking today. Like, how's it really working for you?
Yeah. Right.
How's it working?
Well, and even, to think, again, like when that's formed out of protection, right? It did serve a purpose. Right. It did protect you from feeling whatever distressing emotion it was. But when that becomes a habit and an unconscious habit, then as you get older, it can cause conflict in your relationships and even just for yourself, getting caught up in just unhealthy cycles.
Can you give some examples, Meredith? I mean, you've been working specifically with our teenage girls, young adult women. Can you give some examples of some common defense mechanisms that you've seen that are the go-tos for, like, girls and young women the age you're working with?
Yeah, I think, avoidance, that is a big one and one that I can relate to.
Join the club.
Yeah.
The avoider club.
When I realized that I'm like the pro procrastinator, like it was in grad school when I was like, man, I am really of an avoider, like that procrastination, something like that. You don't realize, kind of what you're doing, but I was avoiding the stress of the homework, whatever it was. Right.
Yeah.
But avoidance is a big one. I think, deflection, that's huge. And actually one of my favorites to call out in session.
I'm glad I'm not in session with you. I'd be in big trouble.
Well, I will say we create that safe space where we have that relationship and I'm able to confront these. But it's so fun, honestly, when we get to the point of them identifying their defense mechanism.
There I go again.
Yeah. And they don't know they're doing these things. And that's being a barrier within our process, right? Because again, if these are formed out of emotional wounds, they're coming to us because there's some distress, right? They're wanting help. And then within that help is getting to the root of these emotional wounds. And then anytime things get emotional, these defenses come up.
Yeah.
So like we'll be talking about, an emotionally kind of heavy thing and just deflect real quick.
Explain what deflection is for those out there who...
So like changing the subject, asking maybe an irrelevant question.
How's the weather out there today?
Right? Yeah. How about those reds?
How about those reds? Yeah.
And it's funny when they get me, like I'll fall for it and I'll be like, hold up. I'm like,
Yeah.
I see what you just did there.
Yeah.
And even in that moment, helping them see like, hey, how are you feeling right now? Because again, if we dig deeper, there's an uncomfortable feeling going on there.
Well, you created, well, I don't know that you created it, but you put together a list of some of the common words. And I really would like to go through them because I know you guys really struggle with these things. I mean,
projection.
What? What do you mean? What? No,
Denial.
And we don't have to spend like hours and hours on each. But man, when I went through your list, I was like, holy cow.
And we are going to attach it to our show notes.
Yeah, we're going to
we're going to have
there.
it for you as well because, man, it's good stuff.
Well, and I think it's because as soon as you hear them, you'll start to go like, ooh, that is me. I resort to that. I do that. And so like you've got them alphabetical, and we'll just let's run through them fast, okay? Like you've got one, acting out, okay? And that is like we might have a child in our house that as soon as you hit him, he's going to act out, okay? And
when we say hit them, we're not saying we hit them. Like,
hit him with a comment. Yeah, you hit the nerve, and right away you get that. I had to look up this word again. This is how I'm getting old and senile in my training. Altruism. Man, like we see this all the time with people. These are do-gooders,
especially in the church.
Rescuers.
Yes, they're the rescue. Oh no, I'll take care of it. And the next thing you know, they put all this time into other people while their house is imploding. Yeah.
Anticipation. You deal with this a lot with people that are anxious. Like, oh my gosh, but what if the car breaks down on the way? And so it's like and anticipating all of the problems that might have and try to figure it all out before it ever even happens.
Right.
And then Meredith, you and I. Avoidance, right?
I thought we were going to skip that one.
I like the way you attach the word procrastination to it because, like, you might think of it as, well, I'm avoiding a hard decision, but it can be baked into your nature of any time, either just some harder work or some problem solving. You're like, I just don't want to go down that road where you procrastinate. And there are some people that as soon as they see an issue, they like just jump right in and go, no, take care of it right now. And so
compartmentalizing is another one, especially guys I think are really big on this. Like they don't even want to talk about their feelings. They don't want to go down that road. They don't want to open up that can of worms. You'll hear that all the time. And so sometimes we can do that to a fault with defensing.
Compensation.
Yeah. So what's compensation about?
So lacking in one area of your life and then putting it all into another part.
Is this why guys drive big trucks
You know,
and crash cars?
I think about that every time I see a big truck. I'm like, what is he compensating for?
Okay, guys, listen. If you feel guilty there, sorry, it's on you.
We mentioned deflection and denial. Those are two biggies. Denial is huge. So if you think this show isn't relevant for you, you're probably dealing with denial.
Yeah. How about displacement, where we're transferring an emotional reaction onto someone or something else?
Yeah.
Okay.
Distraction. Ooh. I feel like it's safe to say we probably all struggle with this one. The world we live in. How many times do you catch yourself just scrolling on social media?
It works really well with procrastination.
Yeah, it does.
You can I don't want to get to this, and so you occupy. I am so busy, and you really come to realize you're busy procrastinating.
Do this next one, Meredith, because you were discussing seeing this in your sessions.
Oh, yeah, disassociation. So kind of go a little deeper. Like when we experience something traumatic, distressing, our brain will disassociate to protect us. You know, to be able to keep on surviving, right?
You mean like what Merle's doing over there? What are you doing?
What are you guys talking about? What?
Bring it back.
Bring it back. Bring it back. Yeah.
But it's so interesting in sessions. I've had many clients, like, again, if you're talking about something that may be a little emotional, or ask them a question and they space out. They're like, oh, my brain just went blank.
Yeah.
And like we usually end up dig deeper on that. And there's been something in the past where, you know, their brain has disassociated to protect. And again, the brain's hardwired and now we're just spacing out.
Yeah.
There's people that have blanked on whole years of their lives because of that. Like it's a protection mechanism that your brain has shut down that most traumatic part. They can't even recall it. But humor is a huge one that I see a lot, where people in a very tense, very difficult situation will bring out a joke in very uncomfortable way that isn't appropriate or timely, but that's their way of defending, right?
Well, and we know that there's an entire occupation created out of this, comedians. We find that there are many comedians that when you scratch the surface, they come to find out that they used humor and comedy to help cover some of I just don't want to go there. And so, you know, you've heard the phrase, you know, I had to laugh to keep from crying. And so that's where a lot of us use this humor to help kind of deflect our own fear.
Yeah.
Man, this next one is good.
Intellectualizing.
Yes.
That's what you do all the time.
No, I'm not smart enough to do that. I would go to humor or avoidance first.
Yeah. Intellectualizing. So basically focusing more on the intellect, the logical facts of a situation.
Yeah. Not the emotion.
These are also like the left brainers, because our, you know, right brainers like myself, we're all into the emotions, and you get in front of a left brain and they're like, let's talk about the facts, please.
Yeah, and they'll intellectualize, and I'll see that running strongly into the rationalization, because then to rationalize, they will get all this hard factual proof to support how brilliant their argument is. Yeah. In the meantime, they can escape their emotion.
Yeah. Which kind of goes with the next one, the isolation of effect, and where we kind of separate the facts from the feelings, and we don't even really want to touch the feeling part. We just want to deal with the facts. And so we're really, and you see this when you have avoiders in there, like they don't even want to tap into those emotions, how that made you feel, right? We're just going to kind of isolate on what happened.
Right.
And that can be a defense mechanism.
The next one is projection. So how you feel about things and projecting it onto others. So we have kind of a rule in our house, and that rule is your negative mood, we do not give you permission to allow it to destroy the rest of the mood of the house. Because a lot of times when you come in angry, you want everybody else to kind of experience your anger and have that. And so it's the next thing you know, everybody's disgruntled. It's like, no. Yeah. So that's that projection when they walk in.
Yeah. Meredith, next one.
Reaction formation. This one also kind of makes me think of the humor, but reaction formation is basically showing the complete opposite emotion that you're actually feeling.
Yeah.
So if you're feeling sad, but presenting as happy.
Did you skip rationalization on purpose? Are you rationalizing that you don't rationalize? So
I thought we chunked that into
because I rationalize,
yeah.
So, and then repression, subconsciously blocking out. That's kind of even past the isolation of effect of really just repressing the memories. Can't even recall them or bring them up. It's not blanking out or isolating them. It's just literally they're repressed. And so, sometimes it is hard to know what to do with that, and is it healthy or safe to bring those memories back up.
Yeah. This next one, regression. So regression is really interesting. I see regression a lot with kids. And so you will see, I recognize this very early working in the elementary school, and I noticed it mostly with boys in the 4th and 5th grade level, when one day they still want to go play with their trucks in the sandbox, and the other day they want those big boy freedoms. And when you start to address them like, oh, you want big boy freedoms, well, guess what? You've got some responsibilities. The next thing you know, you'll hear them do baby talk. I don't know if I can, and so they're going back to that safe zone. Like, can I be a kid right now? And so we've even seen this, like kids that go through a lot of trauma. You'll hear about them stagnating or getting stuck in whatever their safe place was. So maybe they experienced trauma when they were 11, and so they kind of get that emotional maturity level of a 10-year-old, because that's where they go
regress back to thumb sucking or bedwetting, which is a sign of trauma, right? Something has happened to show that defense mechanism of regression.
Yeah, the next one's suppression, so not to be confused with repression. And I even have to look them up because I get confused too.
Okay.
Where repression is where we subconsciously block out, where like if we've experienced something traumatic and we're conscious when it happens, right? But the brain shuts it out. Where suppression, we consciously push it down.
Gotcha.
So like we know it's happening. We're choosing not to deal with this uncomfortable thing.
Yeah, you're right. Repression is more of not even being able to recall them. Suppression is I choose to stuff them down, right? And then we got sublimation, channeling emotions or urges into something useful or safe. And so, that could be like, I'm going to deal with my divorce by starting to take up Taekwondo or something, where we're literally going to take that out into some different way.
Yeah. And that's not always bad, right? Like, you know what? I'm going to start, I'm going to the gym. So I've got all this angst and hurt, and I'm going to start to rechannel it.
Right.
So not
and
bad.
we've seen it go to extremes,
right,
where then they're taking steroids and, they're bulking up and they're, wanting to kind of prove themselves to kind of, compensate for something else.
I think this is also one for our busy bees out there. Just feeling like we got to stay busy. It's hard for them to sit still. So you're making very good use of your time.
And the last one you got there
is the undoing, right? The undoing. And so this is an attempting to cancel out or erase unhealthy, destructive, or threatening thoughts or actions toward another to mitigate the guilt or the shame. And so an example might be something bad has happened and you try to ease it over or cover it up with maybe a gift or a compliment, or maybe if I do this, maybe it'll make it go away.
And the reality is we have to sit in that and acknowledge the pain we've caused somebody or the pain it caused us to be able to heal those wounds. So all of these things we just described are defense mechanisms we use to try to heal emotional wounds in really what could be a very unhealthy way if we do it to the extremes that we're talking about here. Yeah.
So, all right. So Meredith, that was just a good conversation right there with the whole idea of kind of putting a spotlight on these things and seeing, oh man, I kind of hover around these, but at the end of the day, recognizing the defense mechanism does not necessarily take care of it. So how do we start to go, oh, I see I'm doing that. How do I start to deal with it in a more effective way?
Yeah.
Right. And I think the biggest thing really starts with awareness, which I think is great that we're doing this and why I'm glad we are. Because again, I have
a feeling we'll give this stuff for homework sometimes.
Yes, I already have. My clients probably hate me for it. Well, and I think too, like as we said, when you look at all these, you're like, oh my gosh, I do that, and there are going to be some you go to more than others. But I think that's where, even with my clients, I go back to like, hey, like there's no shame in this, because there's a reason this started, right? And again, just being wired to protect. But it can get to a point where you may be having conflict in your relationships, whether that's, not seeing maybe how you're hurting them, and risking losing your family or something, or even having that wall up so high that you're not letting anybody in, and you're isolating and not giving anybody the chance to hurt you.
Yeah. So what you're saying is step one is just the awareness of what those defense mechanisms are, and maybe identifying which ones really you can relate better to and that you more commonly use, right?
Right.
Then what, after you are aware?
Well, then you got to get curious. Ask yourself, and once you read these and you do identify the ones that, tend to come up for you, you'll notice it. Unless you're just a huge denier.
Why did you look at me?
But like really, you'll notice this in your conversations, in your daily life. And, I just encourage you to be curious. Ask yourself, why is this coming up? And again, when I challenge these mechanisms in my sessions, I'll ask the client, hey, how are you feeling? And I think that's another thing to be curious about. These defense mechanisms are coming up for a reason. How are you feeling? What are you trying to protect yourself from in that moment?
Yeah,
I think it's important to point out too, because you said these defense mechanisms, like for a person, and the idea is the frequency of the pattern. It'd be one thing if one time I feel like my back is against the wall, and I come out yelling or screaming, or I do something, but that's not my regular, and where I think, especially in relationships and in everyday life, and we get older, we start doubling down on our particular defense mechanisms, and that's where it can start to channel us in a not so good place. This is that pattern. And so recognize, like, as you said, like defense mechanisms aren't bad in and of themselves. But if we have certain go-tos and we keep repeating them, and it keeps us from getting down to that next level of saying, as you said, that curiousness, man, why do I freak out every time?
What am I afraid of is what I want them to ask.
Like, what's going to happen to me? And digging in deeper, that's where we're asking people to start to get to.
Yeah. You described it when we were talking, and you even made this on your handout, is that it's like bricks in a wall that you're building around your heart, and sometimes around your life. Like you're literally blocking people out by these defense mechanisms. And when we use them all the time in a pattern, or we use a bunch of them, we do keep people out. That connectiveness, the word you couldn't figure out earlier, like we feel isolated, we feel disconnected. Why am I so afraid? What am I worried about? Being curious as to why am I doing that? I think it's really important.
Well, when we think of it as a wall too, not only what are we keeping out, but what are we keeping in? What are we scared
holding on to?
Yeah,
it eats us from the inside.
Oh yeah,
right.
It's good. It's good. Okay, so we're gonna be aware. So we kind of listed these defense mechanisms. Be curious and to really ask the question: what am I afraid of? What am I keeping in? What am I keeping out? And then what's next, Meredith?
Well, we encourage you to take action, which can be hard in this world that likes to tell you to suck it up and, what's happened in the past is the past, move on, be tough, right? Like I feel like the world really, if you're emotional, you're weak, right? You got to be tough, can't be vulnerable. But it's not true. These emotional wounds, they've caused pain, and if you don't address it, if you don't allow yourself time to really sit and feel the feelings.
Deal with the pain.
Yeah, I mean, your emotions, like, it's going to control you.
Yeah. Yeah. And, one of the best ways that I see my clients getting past some of these defense mechanisms is I ask them to find some accountability partners, somebody that they can be honest with, whether it be they go to Celebrate Recovery or AA, where they can say, hey, when you hear me or see me doing this, call me out on it or remind me that I don't want to do that anymore. And so whether it be your spouse, whether it be a parent, a friend, somebody that's going to help you become aware more and have permission to speak into your life. And again, it's got to be someone who's earned the right to be heard, not a total stranger. But I have found that really effective because sometimes I'm just so unaware that I don't even realize I'm doing it sometimes.
Well, when you talk about taking action, to me, we go back to the idea of this is all because of an emotional response. And emotional responses bring out these primal reactions, but they're not necessarily always the best one. And so, let's just say, you said, suck it up and move on, and that's not always effective. But sitting and crying for days on end and getting stuck, that's not effective either.
Right,
and so it's that idea of, okay, recognize that you're being emotionally triggered, right? And so in other words, an alarm is going off, and I talk about fire alarms and fire drills. But our next step is really problem solving. What is a better way, rather than the fire alarm going off and me running out the door and trampling everybody? Okay, maybe I could say, okay, next time when the fire alarm goes off, I'm going to sit for 10 seconds and I'm going to collect my thoughts. And I'm going to think and get a vision of how I'm going to get out of the building and help people on the way. And so now I've channeled the emotion into an active plan versus just running out the building.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and that's where we get into like responding versus reacting, because if we aren't, we are quick to react, right? That react
that's
is
the primal.
Yes, that's the defense mechanism. That's that initial, I'm feeling attacked, I gotta defend myself. Where pausing, and I'll challenge my clients on this too. Like, hey, how about you just pause for 5 seconds before you say anything? Because that's giving your brain time to think rationally rather than emotionally.
Yeah. So awareness is key. You can't change something that you're not aware exists. And so what are your go-to defense mechanisms? We really challenge you to download that PDF that is going to be attached to our show notes and just look through them and maybe circle the ones that you're more likely to go to. And then I really want you to have conversations with people around you and ask them, what are my go-tos? Like sometimes some of them you're not even aware, right, to be helpful. So what else would you recommend, Meredith, for them to do next as a challenge?
Well, I kind of wanted to touch on to more of what you said of a safe person, the accountability and making sure you're processing this stuff with someone safe. And just like I had mentioned, in my sessions, I've already built relationship, with my clients to where I'm able to challenge and highlight when these defenses are coming up. So making sure you're processing this with someone that you feel safe with.
That's the key word, right? It can't be another emotionally charged, wounded person who's just going to fight back with more defense mechanisms, right? We want a safe, secure person that you can have some hard conversations with and really process those emotional wounds in a healthy way.
I'm thinking as you guys are talking about, the question that we often ask in our sessions is, are you coachable? And so this is really that point where somebody keeps kicking back the same defense mechanism, and then you start to challenge it like, hey, you notice what you're doing here? And then at that point, that's where us as coaches and counselors have to help people without threatening them to say, hey, let's walk through this a slightly different way. That's that accountability person helps them look at it. And sometimes because they've not tried other ways, they've only done this one way, they can just dismiss it right off the bat. Like, no, but encouraging them to be coachable. Like, hey, how about we try a different approach?
Taking 5 seconds and breathing
taking
heavy.
5 seconds.
You know?
What's something else you could do?
Yeah.
What's the outcome you're looking for?
Yeah.
How could we get there?
Yeah. So Meredith, before we close, again, this was a topic that we really wanted to share because it is something that we all deal with in session and personally. Is there anything that you would want to leave our listeners? Maybe they're listening to us for the first time or hearing about defense mechanisms for the first time. Anything you would want to leave with them?
The first thing that comes to my mind is just that you're not alone. And I think this can be heavy stuff. Like I said, when we first look at this list, it can be kind of overwhelming and intimidating, and shame can come on.
Wow.
But again, like there's a reason these defenses are coming up, and unfortunately, it's because there's hurt and pain there. So you're not alone, and there's people out there to help and support. And
I love that.
If you want to get to the root of these emotional wounds, we are here.
We're here to help. And there's, pastors, counselors, there's people out there that want to walk alongside you, support groups, whether it be grief or addiction or trauma. So I love that, Meredith, because we are all broken people in need of a savior, and there is no shame there. And we all have jumped to defense to try to protect our heart. And so sometimes we do it subconsciously, sometimes we do it consciously. So, Hun, anything that you think would want to...
Yeah, I just think it's good, and I don't care, male, female, your kids, man. I'm listening through some of this as a parenting perspective and seeing how we do it with our kids, but our kids do it with us. And if you, as a parent, don't recognize how your kids are doing it, you'll just keep poking the bear and get the same response, and you'll wonder why your kid keeps doing what they're doing, and it leads to this frustration. But you have to open the door to a level of comfort and security with your kid, so that they feel comfortable enough not to lash out at you or avoid talking to you or whatever their defense mechanism is. So, man, I just think this is all great stuff, and nobody gets off this chart. Everybody's on this chart somewhere, some way, and so hopefully you guys out there, this is a good introspective study right here to take a look, see how you're doing with it and what you can do to improve. So, Meredith, I want to thank you just for putting together the list and the conversation, because it's just good stuff. So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So thank you so much. If this is the first time you've tuned in to the Rock Solid Families podcast, again, we'd ask that you just check us out at rocksolidfamilies.org. You can connect with us by that or by social media, Facebook, Instagram, or you can call our office at 812-576-ROCK. That's 812-576-7625. So if there's anything that we can do to help you on this journey of healing and wholeness and healthy, we would love to do that. So thank you so much again to our sponsors, Casey's Outdoor Solutions and Maxwell Construction, for their support of the Rock Solid Families podcast and Rock Solid Families.
So we want to thank you for listening to Rock Solid Families, building a stronger community, one family at a time. Make it a great day. Rock Solid Families wants to thank Casey's Outdoor Solutions for sponsoring the Rock Solid Families podcast. Casey's has grown to be one of the largest and most unique garden centers and gift shops in the Cincinnati tri-state area. Whether you are looking to take on that next landscape project or simply add a little home decor to your house, Casey's has you covered. Located at 21481 State Line Road, Lawrenceburg, Indiana. Call them today at 812-537-3800. Let Casey's help you add beauty to your home.